Many people would think that this whole thing with UFOs and aliens is a relatively recent phenomenon. Like, it appeared in the 20th century. Out of nowhere, flying saucers started appearing everywhere. Aliens began abducting people, yet for some reason, the appearance of both the saucers and the aliens was always stereotypical, straight out of science fiction books and movies. But in fact, in a certain sense, the question of extraterrestrial life is already thousands of years old. And I'm not talking about some ancient drawings or low-relief images that supposedly depict astronauts. Wait, actually, I'm talking about them too, but not only about them. Also, philosophical reflections on the possibility of life beyond Earth, scientific searches for this life, and evidence of unidentified objects, and accounts of contact with aliens are far from the same thing. In this video, I wanted to talk about three aspects at once. First of all, when did people even start wondering whether we might not be alone in the universe? How did they think about it? What arguments did they use, and how did they change over the centuries along with our understanding of the universe? Secondly, what are some ancient examples of evidence that we would today call UFOs? What were these phenomena, and how can they be explained? And thirdly, we'll also touch on a delicate topic: the ancient astronaut hypothesis, or the question of paleocontact. The idea is not that just people in ancient times saw something mysterious, but that they were visited by representatives of other civilizations, and perhaps even guided in their development. I'm Andrei, and this is Cosmos Elementary. Considering what we know about the universe today, the unimaginable number of galaxies, stars, and planets, the question of whether we are alone in the universe seems perfectly logical. But hundreds, even thousands of years ago, people had a completely different understanding of the cosmos. And yet people have been thinking about what we would call today extraterrestrial life for a very long time. And not just thinking about it, but actively debating it. If we don't take into account the gods in the mythologies of different cultures who were said to live in the heavens as well. The earliest examples of discussions about extraterrestrial life in a form more familiar to us that I was able to find date back to antiquity, particularly to ancient Greece. Even though we still don't have evidence of life beyond Earth, even on an intuitive level, many people don't find this idea all that extraordinary. Even within our solar system, there are bodies where, as we believe, conditions suitable for life as we know it may exist now or may have existed in the past. But thousands of years ago, to even think about life beyond Earth, one had to first come up with the idea that something exists beyond our planet where life could exist. One of the first, if not the first, concepts of the cosmos that even remotely resembles our modern understanding belongs to the ancient Greek philosopher Anaximander, who lived before 610 to 546 BCE. In his model, the Earth was sort of hanging unsupported in an infinite void, an idea that fits quite well with our modern understanding of the universe. What didn't match, however, was the shape of the Earth. It wasn't exactly a flat disk, but a cylinder with the land situated on one flat surface. This is roughly what his model looked like. The Earth, of course, was at the center, surrounded by rings with openings in which were the stars, the moon, the sun, and the planets. Sure, not everything here, of course, is accurate, but the idea of an infinite cosmos without clearly defined directions was revolutionary, and it allowed for the existence of other worlds. After that came Leucippus and his better-known student Democritus. They are often called the founders of ancient Greek atomism, a concept in which two things exist in the universe: atoms and the void. Atoms are the smallest, eternal, indivisible particles that can move and interact, and from which all macroscopic objects are formed. And the void, well, that's just empty space. Democritus believed that in an infinite void, with an infinite number of atoms, an infinite number of worlds could exist. This is how the idea of multiple worlds arose. This idea was also shared by some other atomists, who believed that these worlds could be either similar to ours or completely different. Interestingly, it's likely they didn't mean other planets, but rather that somewhere far away beyond what we can see, other universes exist. It's a bit reminiscent of a modern level 1 multiverse, where other universes are understood as regions beyond our observable universe. In addition to the idea that other worlds could exist, the atomists also believed that they could be inhabited, including by intelligent beings. And all of this centuries before the start of our era. But not everyone in that era agreed on the possibility of other worlds and their inhabitants. Aristotle, for example, was an opponent. It neither fit his model of the universe nor with how he believed gravity worked. Like many others, he believed that the Earth was at the center of the universe. By the way, the Earth was already considered spherical. Around the Earth is a series of other spheres. The Earth sits motionless at the center while the spheres rotate around it. The Moon, the Sun, the planets, and the stars are attached to those spheres. Aristotle explained gravity by the fact that the Earth is at the center of the universe. Objects strive for their quote-unquote natural place, which is also the center of the universe. Since the Earth is at the center, everything falls towards its surface. If other worlds similar to Earth existed, matter would strive not only toward Earth, but also toward those other worlds, which apparently was not observed. Plus, he also believed that beyond our world, beyond our spheres, there was no space, no void. In short, there was simply no room for other worlds. And what we see is all that exists. And despite the ideas of the atomists, Aristotle's worldview remained dominant for several hundred years. Now let's move to the Middle Ages. This period usually isn't strongly associated with thoughts about aliens, but those ideas did exist back then. However, most of these discussions were framed through the lens of religion, specifically Christianity of that time. Christian authors at the turn of late antiquity and the early Middle Ages generally considered extraterrestrial life to be impossible, largely because they adhered to Aristotelian views of the cosmos. There are also many later examples. For instance, in the 13th century, many thinkers addressed the question of extraterrestrial life. By the way, many examples I'm bringing up today come from Professor Michael Crow, author of the Extraterrestrial Life Debate. And how about this quote from Albertus Magnus, the German philosopher, scientist, theologian, and scholar? Since one of the most wondrous and noble questions in nature is whether there is one world or many, it seems desirable for us to inquire about it. He did reflect on the topic with his student, but since they were also supporters of the Aristotelian system, they came to the conclusion that no. Basically, Aristotle was to blame again. But suddenly, closer to the end of the 13th century, something interesting happened. The Bishop of Paris, Etienne Tempier, banned Aristotle. Or more precisely, the ban targeted certain doctrines of Aristotle's philosophy, or those that were believed to be connected to his philosophy. Among these doctrines was one particularly relevant to us: the claim that God cannot create multiple worlds. And this prohibition once again sparked discussions about other worlds and extraterrestrial life. Although at first the conclusions were still mostly negative. But then in the 15th century, Nicholas of Cusa came along. In 1440, he published his work on learned ignorance. He wrote about the fact that the Earth is not the center of the universe and that there are many other worlds, but most importantly, that they could be inhabited, and that life could exist on the Moon and even on the Sun. If you thought that he was some obscure, insignificant figure, that's not the case at all. He was already a fairly prominent figure, and after publishing this work, he wasn't punished for heresy. In fact, 7 years later, he became a cardinal. Then came Giordano Bruno, who also speculated about the existence of inhabitants of other worlds who could even be more advanced than humans. And of course, he didn't focus only on this. He was a bit less lucky with the reaction to his ideas, if you know what I mean. But then came Copernicus, geocentrism began to fade away, and heliocentrism became increasingly accepted. The fact that the Earth is just one of the planets became established, which also implied the existence of other planets, that is, other worlds. Over time, stars began to be seen as objects similar to the Sun, and that they could be surrounded by other planets, possibly habitable. When Galileo Galilei discovered the moons of Jupiter, Johannes Kepler, in a letter congratulating Galileo, speculated that any planet with moons should also have inhabitants. Gradually, telescopes improved and more details could be seen on the surface of the Moon and, for example, Mars. In the 19th century, astronomers believed that there were straight canals on Mars, which could have been built by an advanced civilization. Today, of course, with much more detailed images, we know that no such canals exist. And as our understanding of the universe developed, it became increasingly vast in our view. Today we know that in the observable universe alone, there are hundreds of billions of galaxies, each containing billions or even trillions of stars and planets. In this context, it's hard to believe that out of such an enormous number of worlds, ours is the only inhabited one. But interestingly, people were thinking about this even when, in their understanding, there were no other planets like Earth and no room for extraterrestrial life. And of course, there are many more examples of such ideas and speculations. I've only mentioned the most notable ones. In short, the question, are we alone in the universe, is very ancient. But what about UFO sightings? When it comes to the UFOs, someone might again think that this is a recent phenomenon. But that's not the case here either. Moreover, as it is often necessary to clarify that when people see a UFO, it doesn't mean they're seeing aliens. They are seeing some object or phenomenon whose nature is unknown to them. And considering that the further back in time you go, the less knowledge and understanding people had about workings of the world and the nature of various phenomena, including celestial ones, the fewer objects in the sky they could identify. It might seem then there should have been more UFOs in the past. But here we have an interesting situation. On one hand, today we can explain a lot. On the other hand, there are more people and more ways to record phenomena. For some reason, people usually use 0.3 megapixel cameras for this, and their hands always shake while filming. And there are more ways to share this information nowadays. In the past, on the other hand, people might have had fewer ways to explain things. But getting that information to survive until our time, that was the real challenge. So it turns out that today we know a lot, and there are many UFO sightings. But information, especially high-quality information about similar ancient events, is much more scarce. Today, many documented UFO cases are easily explained as airplanes, regular balloons and stratospheric balloons, drones, birds, and all kinds of flying debris. In the past, none of this existed, so natural phenomena are more likely to have been the main causes. Of course, even now that doesn't mean that such phenomena don't exist. They certainly do, and there can be quite a few of them. And let me remind you, even today with all of our knowledge, with the internet and specialized astronomical apps, every year when Venus is clearly visible in the sky, many people mistake it for a UFO, simply because it's brighter than the stars and it can appear in different parts of the sky at different times, well, relative to the stars. Now imagine a person thousands of years ago who knew nothing about the nature of various phenomena, and they see something like a perihelion, or a sundog, or a mock sun, an optical effect that occurs in the Earth's atmosphere when on either side of the real sun, two mock quote-unquote suns appear because sunlight is refracted in a special way through ice crystals in the atmosphere. And besides perihelion, there are other types of halos as well. Add to that especially bright meteors and bolides, and remember that those entering the atmosphere can have different properties, so the flashes can vary as well. Auroras that can appear in regions closer to the equator than usual during periods of particularly high solar activity and can put on quite a show as well. Novae, comets, different forms of lightning, and these are just most obvious examples. There can also be unusual phenomena associated with volcanic eruptions and even with earthquakes. In short, there was quite a lot that could have been unexplained for people of that time while still being entirely natural. If a person saw a meteor 5,000 years ago and didn't know what it was, they'd be amazed. UFO? UFO. And even if we had no documentary evidence of it, we can be sure that such things happened. But we still have some evidence of such events, and the earliest examples I was able to find once again date back to antiquity. At the turn of the eras lived the Roman historian Titus Livius. He was born in 59 BCE and died in 17 CE. In his works, he also compiled lists of so-called prodigies, wonders or miraculous signs. Among them, there are quite a few examples that, based on their descriptions, closely resemble what we would call today UFOs. I found an article published on NASA's website as well, titled Unidentified Flying Objects in Classical Antiquity. And this article actually provides numerous examples from the works of Livy. The earliest example here dates back to 218 BCE. At that time, it was observed, quote, "A spectacle of ships gleamed in the sky." Yeah, that wording would certainly appeal to UFO enthusiasts. I can easily imagine how hearing this they picture shiny flying saucers, but still, by ships here they obviously didn't mean starships, just ordinary waterborne ships. The question is, what were they doing in the sky? First of all, there's of course a big question about the reliability and accuracy of this story, which is over 2,000 years old. But even if we assume that someone really did see something in the sky back then and interpreted it as ships, among natural explanations there could be unusual clouds or atmospheric phenomena like mirages. By the way, we'll have another example involving ships later. There is a report of a stone in the sky from 212 BCE. Interestingly, Titus Livius himself tries to explain many of these events. For example, he explains this one as a bird. Even today, some people mistake birds for unidentified objects. In 104 BCE, people observed weapons in the sky. Again, this sounds quite appealing to UFO enthusiasts. More precisely, the phenomenon was described as, quote, "flaming spears and oblong shields." Considering that they were seen at night, these could very well have been auroras during a period of unusually high solar activity. There are many more such examples, but I won't list them all. I'll leave a link to a document with a compilation. It also includes all sorts of fiery balls, which could be meteors or bolides, as well as various types of halos. In short, people in antiquity were already observing UFOs. That is, they saw something in the sky but didn't know what it was. However, they usually associated these events not with aliens, but with gods and various omens. Some of these accounts may indeed sound strange, but of course, today we cannot say for certain what they really were. All we have are texts, ancient texts. You've probably noticed that the cases I mentioned occurred long before Livy lived. So, not only did he not witness these events himself, he didn't even get these accounts firsthand. He took them from chronicles that were decades or even centuries older than he was. Another big question lies in the wording. Are these descriptions literal or metaphorical? Did people really think they saw ships and spears in the sky, or were they just using familiar images to describe what they saw? Did they exaggerate or embellish the events? In short, these are retellings of retellings within a certain degree of reliability, and of course, such events didn't stop there. On April 4, 1561, an aerial battle took place in the sky over Nuremberg. At least that's how some interpret this news flyer, showing a drawing of an unusual celestial phenomenon, along with a description of the event. Allegedly, many people saw cylinders, spheres, and crosses flying in the sky. The sun had arcs around it, and later some kind of black spear-like object appeared. The illustration is indeed strange, like some kind of Star Wars-style battle in the sky. And of course, UFO enthusiasts really love this story. The article, well, it's not exactly solid evidence on its own, especially considering that its author repeatedly wrote about quote-unquote strange things. Imagine that 500 years from now, someone finds an issue of today's tabloid press about aliens, without knowing the context, what kind of publications these are, and they might be quite surprised. That is, it might not have happened at all and could be entirely fictional, but people could still have observed some phenomenon which they interpreted according to their understanding and knowledge of the world. If we take the drawing completely literally at a face value, there are still reasonable explanations. Many of the objects could be explained by various halos and parhelia. Notice the arcs near the sun. Similar arcs are observed in certain types of solar halos. Even the perhaps strangest black spear-like object can likely be explained by shadows like these. Another interesting event took place in 1665. Apparently, 6 fishermen near the shores of Stralsund in the Baltic Sea saw, a battle of ships in the sky. Interestingly, in this case, it seems they literally did see something like that. A naval battle was actually taking place not far away, and they saw an atmospheric reflection, a mirage, over the horizon. Later in the 19th century, there were quite a few reports of flying objects, but this time they were described as airships. Airships and balloons had already been invented and were in use, so people could very well have been seeing those. It's actually interesting how descriptions of unidentified objects and phenomena are directly connected to what existed at the time. In antiquity, spears, shields, ships, and in 19th century, balloons. But at that time, associations with inhabitants of other worlds generally didn't exist. It's more that some people today interpret these ancient accounts that way, and we also can't be sure about the reliability of many of these reports. Yet, that doesn't stop some speculation. So we've established that people have been thinking about the possibility of extraterrestrial life for a very long time, and have been observing unidentified flying objects for just as long. But to take these two ideas a step further and suggest that we were visited not by gods, but by highly advanced extraterrestrial civilizations, that's a more modern story. It became popular in the 20th century, although discussions about it appeared a bit earlier, including in works of fiction. Modern speculations that aliens may have visited us in the past, of course, considered pseudoscientific today. But it's interesting that not only fringe figures discuss this topic. In 1966, this book was published and written by none other than Carl Sagan and Joseph Shklovsky. And in that book, they not only allow for the possibility that humans may have had contact with extraterrestrials in the past, but also that some evidence of this could have been preserved in various cultures. But even though they discussed it, they noted that such ideas are speculative and unproven, and should be approached with skepticism. The boom of such ideas happened around these years, and later Sagan wrote that Shklovsky regretted that they might have played some role in the whole ancient astronaut story. One of the most influential books in this field is the famous book by Erich von Däniken, Chariots of the Gods. Among his main arguments in favor of the idea that aliens visited us, which eventually became standard for supporters of the paleocontact or ancient astronaut hypothesis, was that supposedly ancient people could not have built the structures or created the artifacts we find today, or left the traces we see. Obvious examples here include, of course, the Egyptian pyramids, Stonehenge, the Moai statues, the Nazca geoglyphs, and so on. The claim is basically, we don't know how ancient people could have built this, but these statements more likely reveal gaps in the knowledge of the authors of these conspiracy theories, rather than gaps in the knowledge of scientists. And of course, intentional distortion to sell more books. And Erich von Däniken sold a lot of them, and has dozens of books, some of which were bestsellers, and by some estimates, he earned tens of millions of dollars from them. But modern archaeological research as well as experiments show that to build even impressive structures like the Egyptian pyramids, it was not necessary to have super advanced technology. If you have a lot of manpower, time, and fairly simple tools that were available back then, you can manage perfectly well without the help of extraterrestrials. In general, these authors really tend to underestimate our ancestors. Another key argument of von Däniken and those who followed in his footsteps is that supposedly there are numerous ancient images, drawings, and sculptures that depict ancient astronauts. For example, the helicopter in ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs. In reality, it's a typical case of pareidolia. The Japanese dogu figurines, which, according to von Däniken, look very much like astronauts. This also includes the example of the aerial battle I mentioned earlier. On this lid of the tomb of the Maya ruler Pakal, some people see him as flying in a spaceship. You can find many such examples, but it's important to remember, these aren't photographs. They are all artistic works, often inspired by mythology. Yes, among millions of images and works from the ancient world, whether you want it or not, you can find something that resembles some of our modern stereotypical ideas about aliens or about certain technologies. But besides that, there's also a whole bunch of other strange things, unusual phenomena, mythological creatures, and we don't really consider images of such beings as literal documentary proof of their existence. Although, of course, there are certainly people who do think that. And some of it is simply outright fakes, like the Ica stones or fake skulls. By the way, Eric von Daniken himself was convicted of fraud, and he wrote one of his books while in prison. Also, quite a lot of popularization came from the rather wild series on the History Channel, which covered all of this and even claimed that aliens got rid of the dinosaurs to make way for humans. Considering the time gap between dinosaurs and first humans, they didn't exactly pick the most effective method. In short, complete nonsense in the best traditions of some TV channels. Some other authors even claim that ancient aliens didn't just help humans with technology, but directly influenced human evolution. For example, creating a new species by manipulating DNA. And of course, there is no evidence of such a sudden leap in evolution. By the way, one of the explanations for why the aliens would even do this is as follows. Supposedly, the extraterrestrials needed slaves to mine gold on Earth. So, those who supposedly have interstellar travel technology created a new species so that they could mine gold using primitive methods. And as is usually the case with conspiracy theorists, there isn't a single or even most likely widely accepted hypothesis. Everyone just writes whatever comes to mind. And their evidence usually boils down to, it seems to me this looks like something. And, well, they couldn't have done it themselves. Any kind of evidence that would meet any scientific criteria simply doesn't exist here, which is why the ancient astronaut hypothesis is predictably considered pseudoscientific. Yes, at first glance, paintings like this might seem strange. Light from the sky, a biblical scene, but if we didn't have the 20th century stereotype of flying saucers in our mind, would we even think of aliens? And if you take a higher quality image and look closely, right in the center of the circle of light, it's actually a dove. Pigeons are alien surveillance systems. Thanks for watching. Links to all of the sources are as always down below in the description, and if you enjoyed the video, leave a like, comment and subscribe for more videos in future. Bye.